Well, good morning, everyone. It is my distinct honor and privilege to be on the stage and have the opportunity to interview the Secretary of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano. Welcome, Madam Secretary. Secretary Napolitano, as all of you know, concluded our conference last year, so it's only appropriate that she open it and be interviewed this year. And then last July, we had the great opportunity to have a small dinner with her in Sao Paulo with a number of our members, which allowed us to really exchange views. Secretary Napolitano assumed her current office in January of 2009, and in this critical role, she is responsible for securing the United States from threats that are diverse as terrorism to natural disasters. Madam Secretary, almost everyone in this room interacts with your department probably more than any other in Washington. After all, we all travel nonstop. And in fact, I would bet there is a very high concentration of trusted travelers and TSA pre-check in this room today. Prior to joining the Obama administration, Secretary Napolitano was the 21st governor of Arizona from 2003 to 2009, where she implemented one of the first state Homeland Security strategies in the nation and opened the first state counterterrorism center, which led to efforts to transform immigration enforcement. And she was the first woman to chair the National Governors Association, and in 2005, she was named one of the top governors in the country. As Homeland Security Secretary, she has been a major proponent of comprehensive immigration reform, which we at the Council of the Americas are also a major proponent of, and she has also shown a deep commitment to working with Mexico to ensure national security, mutual security, while facilitating trade and travel along the border. She has traveled to Latin America several times. She understands the threats we face increasingly cross international borders, and she is a strong advocate of international partnerships, which we will talk more about in the interview. There will be Q&A. It will be a little bit different. You have cards in front of you, and so if you have a question, please write the question and pass it to people that will be collecting it. So with that, why don't we just start the interview? Madam Secretary, the Department of Homeland Security recently commemorated its 10th anniversary. How has the department's view evolved in terms of ensuring a secure environment over the last decade? And what changes have been implemented to respond to that evolving vision?
First of all, thank you for having me. It's wonderful to see all of you as we talk about what I think is a critical area of the world and where so much is changing and rapidly and progress is being made. So it's a very exciting time. DHS, 10 years old, largest reorganization of the federal government since the creation of the Defense Department. Its infancy kind of marked by just, getting a common email address, et cetera, all the nuts and bolts of a large government institution. It's the last 5 years, I would say, kind of a growing recognition of our 5 core missions, I would say: counterterrorism, air, land, and sea border security, immigration, cybersecurity, and disaster response, and making major changes and evolutions in each of those 5 areas. And now we're moving into our next era, which I refer to as DHS 3.0, and we will be more targeted, more risk-based. We will be using more innovation and different types of technologies to facilitate legitimate travel and trade, even as we carry out our security responsibilities. I think cyber is going to be a very rapidly growing area of concern and of focus for the department writ large. I think we will hopefully, knock on wood, we will be very busy implementing comprehensive immigration reform in the United States. So I think more risk-based and intelligence-driven for the travel and trade facet of our work, more cyber, and hopefully really implementing a major overhaul of the immigration system.
Thank you very much. So following on from that, and I think as we discussed last year in Brazil, every Latin American country would like to be considered in the Trusted Traveler program. And is this realistic, and what are the requirements? I mean, how does this program square with our objective for an effective security cooperation agenda?
It's difficult to predict right now which countries of Central and South America we might enter into agreements with. There's a global, how many of you are members of Global Entry? Can you raise your hands? Do you like it? Okay. One of our number one goals right now is to keep expanding Global Entry for U.S. persons coming in from abroad. We're really actually struggling to keep up with the demand for this program, which we have not advertised. It's almost word of mouth, but it's accelerating because we do have security requirements before we can grant admission into the program. To link that program effectively with TSA PreCheck, and to grow PreCheck more rapidly than it's grown before. And then finally to really continue the process of uniting all the various different ways that the department and indeed the U.S. government collects data on people that should be collated, cross-referenced, et cetera. One of the things I asked our shop one time was, how many times do we, DHS, collect the same information about individuals on average? And on average, it's about 16 times. And so it seems to me, on average, we ought to be able to reduce that number. So those kinds of things, are when I talk about being more intelligence-driven and risk-based, you can't get to more intelligence-driven and risk-based until your data systems permit you to do that. So that's a major project that we have underway.
Thank you very much. Last week, President Obama was in Mexico. In Central America, and discussion touched on many topics, two of which are security and trade. So maybe we could talk a little bit about security, particularly in Mexico and Central America. I mean, how do you see our relationship with Mexico evolving over time? And how is this going to impact Central America? Because they're clearly linked as we look down the path.
Well, I think, first of all, we had a very strong relationship with the Calderon administration where security and trade were concerned. Many of the things that we're doing now kind of grow out of things that were done in the Calderon administration. So I think some of the press accounts I've read recently in Washington, to me, overstate kind of the differences between the current Peña Nieto administration and Calderon where security is concerned. We're still jointly involved. We are still focused on the reduction of violence in Mexico, the disruption of the cartels that have fingertips into many communities in the United States. Looking at some new tools, money laundering, for example, that we haven't used effectively before, but I think we can do some major things there now. So the security arrangements and relationships are very strong. Where we have to work together that you will see is on the trade and travel side. And that means, for example, both countries should have skin in the game where improvements at the land border are concerned. Those big ports of entry, we need to be putting some construction dollars into them. Mexico needs to be doing the same. It should be a managed border zone and really using the best kind of technologies available, sharing information and the like. So we have a lot of work we can do jointly at the geographic or physical borders. But in between that, the sharing information of travelers, the sharing of information of other things that transit both our countries, I think we'll see those relationships continue to build. With respect to Central America, the other countries there, again, It's a little bit dependent on country by country, and we have pledged and will be working very closely with those that want to work with us on joint security and the like. We know, for example, the transnational criminal organizations don't just stop in Mexico, they go further south. So we have a lot of work to do there. But I think the president's visit in Mexico was very successful. He and Peña Nieto get along. I think they see that the relationship between Mexico and the United States is not just security, it's security that is economic as well as physical, and the trade involves hundreds of thousands of jobs on both sides of the border.
Well, going back and continuing on trade, about $1.4 billion of trade passes the border each day between Mexico and the United States, and the supply chains are very much intertwined, and that's going to grow. And so, I mean, going back to what you talked about, how do we keep border security and really be able to grow commerce the way we need to grow commerce well into the future? I mean, the countries are becoming more and more integrated every day from an economic perspective.
Well, and let me just say this. We have, record amounts of manpower, technology, whatever, at the southwest border. To me, as a former governor of Arizona, one of the problems historically has been that that once the attention is turned to something else, the resources go away. Those resources need to be sustained. This is a big border. It's a heavily trafficked border. And we know we can do even more to secure it. So let no one think there's not a commitment to doing that. Our efforts to do that will be assisted if we can get more, for example, companies in Mexico to qualify and enroll in programs like CTPAT, which is a trusted trader arrangement with customs. We can facilitate them as they enter the trade lanes coming into a border port, and facilitate them going through a port. It's almost the same as being in global entry as a passenger, I mean, if you're in CTPAT. When we do that, we facilitate the security we need to have. Why? Because we can focus those record resources on things we don't know enough about and we really need to be able to check. So to me, that demonstrates the linkage between the trade stuff and the security matters that we have to be able to accomplish.
And how does CTPAT, is it applicable for other countries in the world? I mean,
Yeah, CTPAT is worldwide. It is worldwide. And it is our largest trusted trader program through customs. So if you want information about it, please let us know. It's easily available. It's probably somewhere on our website if you can navigate our website.
If you can navigate your website. Okay. Can you talk, this wasn't in the list of questions, but you touched at the very beginning on cyber threats. And every day you pick up the newspaper and we realize how important cybersecurity is and how we're just at the beginning of really what is going to be a long road in making sure that we secure cyberspace. Could you just comment a little bit on that? Because I think it's something everyone would be interested in.
Well, I can say it is the fastest growing area of our shop. Under the President's policy directive and the executive order, DHS has major responsibilities for securing the .gov domains, but also securing and working with the private sector on critical infrastructure. We have a very tight timeline for this, setting the standards for that. We work with NIST out of the Department of Commerce. There's a whole process for this. It's extraordinarily important and extraordinarily complicated. But in terms of real-time, ongoing threat in the United States to our infrastructure and thereby to our way of doing life, cyber is a very, very concerning and active field. So it's one of the things, as I said in my earlier remarks, we're really full bore on.
We're getting some questions from the floor, but while we do that, let's just, maybe we could focus on immigration reform. As I said at the beginning, it's something that the Council, America Society feel very, very strongly about. There seems to be finally some momentum for immigration reform, and it, in our view, will be transformative. So once this happens, and assuming that we do accomplish it, which I will make that assumption, what impact is it going to have on security, and how do you see that changing and transforming our relationship with our neighbors?
Well, first of all, we're at the beginning of a long road. The Gang of Eight bill, I think, is very consistent with the principles the President has enunciated. And I testified a week or so ago before the Senate Judiciary Committee that we can embrace the principles embraced in that bill. But it's a big bill. It's 800 some odd pages long. There's lots to it. It is an overhaul of our immigration system. It actually improves security from my standpoint. Why? Because it's not just about the border. It links that with what are the major drivers of illegal migration of the country? Well, it's employers who hire illegal labor. So it has an employer verification system in there. And it's also the problem in getting legal visas, and it really reforms a number of the visa programs in a productive way. So you take two of those major drivers out of the mix or reduce them. Again, it allows you to focus on who's trying to come through the country illegally and why. We can focus more on the narco traffickers and the human traffickers and the like who are trying to exploit the border. So it is a good security bill, and overall, I think accomplishes what it needs to with respect to overhauling the nation's immigration law.
Thank you very much.
By the way, as you all know, this is going to be the beginning of a long process. This is far from done. I believe the committee markup begins this week. So I would not be sanguine. I think we just need to keep working it.
Thank you. I have a great question here from Melissa Sanderson of Freeport. In the area of cybersecurity, many of the recent attacks are against the private sector and other entities. And in general, cyber espionage against companies is also on the rise. How do you plan to cooperate with the private sector, especially in key areas like electricity and banking, to improve cyber defense and safeguard individuals?
It's what I meant when I said we have responsibility under the presidential directives to work with the owners and operators of critical infrastructure on real-time information sharing, on adoption of best practices, on adoption of voluntary standards for securing their cyber systems. And so when we look at that, we look at the financial sector, we look at the energy sector, we look at each of the 18 critical infrastructure sectors in the United States. We do have a method of coordinating with each of those through coordinating councils. We do it with physical infrastructure. We're going to use the same methodology with respect to cyber infrastructure. This will be an interesting test for the United States because the Congress has said, no, we're not going to do this as a mandatory regulatory environment. We're going to do this as kind of a engaged, cooperative environment with the private sector. So we say, okay, we're ready to engage and cooperate. It's to everyone's interest that we do so, but this will be an interesting test for us as a country as to whether we are indeed able to achieve the level of cybersecurity we need.
There are a number of questions here on immigration. One of them from Juan Gutierrez is that an important part of immigration reform is improving border security. Considering that prevention is key to any security program, does your department have any programs or plans to reduce or increase the number of people at the border or stop more people crossing the border or whatever? And then there's another question about immigration. The practical, why is it so difficult to determine if someone is legal since we issue the visas to begin with? So I guess...
well, let me start with that one.
Okay.
And say that circumstances people's circumstances change over time. And so status changes over time. And when you're talking about, you know, the kind of numbers we talk about in the United States with respect to foreign travelers and the like, that's why so many different things always need to be checked. There is constant movement toward improving the systems, making them easier to use, making them easier to check, and the like. And I think that's part of DHS 3.0. That's part of that risk-based intelligence-driven process that we have had underway. With respect to the border, I think that in any iteration, if you look at the president's budget, if you look at what Congress has passed, if you look at the draft bill, border security in terms of manpower, technology, whatever, is going to be supported and needs to be supported. To me, the key thing is not necessarily more Border Patrol agents. We need to sustain the numbers we have down there, which are record numbers, but we need to fill out the technology plans for each of the 9 border sectors, and that is underway. And that's clearly contemplated in any kind of immigration reform that is being marked up.
Thank you. I guess this is a question that we would expect to be asked after Boston. What's being done to really check student visas more closely and ensure that when students are done being students or want to come in as students, that we're doing the right kinds of background checks on them?
Without talking specifically about the criticality or materiality of anything that may have happened with respect to some of the people associated possibly with the brothers in the Boston terrorist attack. Let me just say that when I talked about we had underway and have had underway this process for, we call it common vetting, bringing things together, what have you, part of that is making sure that data held by one department way over here on one program is united with data held over here, and it's exchanged in real time, so everyone has access, everyone who needs to has access to it. With respect to, you know, students, this is a great example, student status changes over the course of their visa life. They may have a visa that allows them to stay, say, through the spring semester, and then it turns out that after the drop period for the semester is over, they had dropped out. And that is reported on the immigration side. So there's 2 things that need to be looked at simultaneously. I think we have and are doing that and have figured out that fix right now. We're doing it actually manually, but I think we'll be able to automate in the next weeks.
So there's a question following up on that.
This is probably more than you need to know or want to know, but this is my life, you know. This is like, you know, figuring all these things out. It sounds easy. It's not that easy. Those of you who have been in the government, I think you can appreciate knitting things together is one of the key challenges. And in DHS, I think we've done a good job so far, but I think we have a very clear vision about where we need to be in the next year or 2 years on some of this stuff. So assuming we get properly resourced, I think you're going to see our continued ability to mature that whole data sharing environment.
Well, this is, I think I know the answer, but there was one question, which is it your agency's gotten so big, is it time to split it, international versus domestic, into 2 different agencies or whatever? I think it would go against everything you've just talked about, but I would like to comment on it.
You know, I think it's not a matter of how big or small DHS is. It is. We exist. We're there. We're going to continue to be there. The challenge is to continue to meet the needs the country has with our many mission spaces. So it's It's the security side, it's the facilitation of travel side. It is making sure our cyber networks are secure. It's making sure that trade can occur as efficiently as possible. And it's taking different cultures, different agencies, and really blending them into one Homeland Security enterprise. As I said, I think we've made great progress in that regard in our initial 10 years, and I think we have a very clear vision about where we need to go over the next few years, and that's what we're set to accomplish.
So when you wake up every morning, Secretary Napolitano, what is the thing that concerns you the most? I mean, does it change every day? Is there one overriding concern beyond just saying keeping the country secure? What bothers you day to day the most? What concerns you?
And I'll bet some of you all had this feeling. What bothers me is sometimes not so much what I know about, because what I know about I can deal with.
Right.
And we have great people, and we can put people on it, and we can, really work through problems. I think it's the so-called known unknown. We can never know everything, and what we know we can never have perfect information about. In the kind of things, in the kind of world I deal in on a daily basis, that is what can be of concern. So you just got to say, look, we are going to take the resources we have, the men and women we have, we're going to focus, we're going to make sure we concentrate on everything that we can do realistically to ensure security while performing these other functions like travel and trade, and we're going to keep evolving, because the environment in which we exist is not static. The environment now, from a terrorism standpoint, for example, is not the same as it was 10 years ago. If we were doing everything exactly the same, we would not be meeting our responsibilities. So we have got to, in the world of the known unknown, we also have to continue to change.
And the Panama Canal, the widening of that, how does that present new security issues for us, if it does at all?
Yeah, I think it's a fascinating project, by the way, and I think will be more impactful than is being discussed yet publicly. But it's a matter of making sure the Coast Guard, make sure we have the right port infrastructure, as you get larger bottom vessels that can transit the canal, making sure that the things are in place to move the containers or what have you efficiently from the port environment throughout the United States. So I suspect and expect that kind of planning is ongoing and has been for a while.
So another question about Mexico. Can you visualize, because there's a lot of congestion at our southern border because there's so much trade and so much integration, can you ever envision keeping the border or some of the border crossings open 24/7, making it almost a virtual border?
I don't know about a virtual border, but 24/7 would be great in some places. I mean, my focus now is much more pedestrian, so to speak. I mean, I want to get the port projects done at San Ysidro, which is the most heavily trafficked port, I think, in the world, where if you want to just spend 3 or 4 hours resting in your car, listening to music or whatever, you just go get in line at San Ysidro. We'll be happy to accommodate you. That kind of stuff, look, we can fix that. It requires both countries working together to, build the roads, construct the lanes, put the technology in place. The U.S. has a major construction process involved with the GSA. We're working with Mexico there. Boy, it would be nice to speed those up. And then as we go across this border, really looking at the other places where we have major trade opportunities, which result in hundreds of thousands of jobs in the United States that are bottlenecked up because we haven't put in place the port infrastructure for a 21st century border. So when I say we need a 21st century border, I mean it in exactly those kind of physical terms. It needs to work for the border environment we have.
Thank you very much. So I have one last question before our time is up, because as I said, so many people want a global entry. So the question, and the final question is, when will global entry extend to all of the citizens of the Americas, from Canada all the way to...
This is like Final
tip of
Jeopardy, you know. And
Patagonia.
your final question is, and the answer is, I don't know. And the reason is because global entry requires reciprocal understandings of what background checks are, what they entail. We have the United States has some pretty strict standards where these things are concerned, and some of our closest friends and allies, I'm not just talking about Central and South America, but countries around the world, they don't necessarily do it to the same level. So what we are working through with them is creating bilateral, multilateral arrangements where there is consistency across the board and what kind of checking and vetting, renewing, data collection, data sharing, et cetera, is done for members of a voluntary trusted traveler program. We are committed, I will say, to moving the global entry type of regime to us. As I said before, the more people we get in these types of programs, that we take pressure off of the borders, the ports, and we can focus the resources we have on those people and the things we don't know much about, which is a much better way to use our resources. A metaphor or comparison you might use is, look, sometimes we need to look for a needle in a haystack. One of the ways to make that search more effective is to reduce the size of the haystack. And so think of each of yourselves as pieces of hay. We're all pieces of hay in the great haystack. All kidding aside, I think you understand what I'm talking about, which is to say, in a world where there's so much information and data and so forth flying around, how do we focus our resources where they will do the most good? And one of the fundamental ways we do it now is through traveler and trade programs that, in a sense, pre-screen people.
With that, I think our time is up. I want to thank Secretary Napolitano for her time, for her openness, for her frankness, and we wish you the best of luck, because if you're good and you're effective, your agency's effective, it means that we're all safer, not just in the United States, but around the world. So
Thank you
very much.
Thank you all very much.